Hopefully we have the tech issues resolved for the rest of this presentation. Hello and welcome. I'm here to talk about building trust. So before we get into that, I just want to see, does anyone recognize this face? Okay, so it sounds like most of us do, but for a quick rundown for those who don't, this is former CEO Elizabeth Holmes to the now defunct biotech startup Theranos, and they had a ton of positive media attention and garnered a lot of investor money. At one point, they were actually valued at $9 billion, which surprised me, because now they are, worth nothing. And she's, I think, going to jail. But why am I bringing her up? So this story is a great reminder as to how important it is to build trust early on in the metrics behind your projects, particularly science-driven or experimental projects, such as machine learning projects. And I feel like this reminder is what I wanted to start off today's talk with, because we're going to be talking about MLFlow, but in reality, what we're really trying to get at is how to build trust through metrics. So I'm going to argue that building trust through metrics and in your process is just as important as building your actual product. So today's talk is really about how we can build that trust and what tools we can use to do that. And we're going to be focusing specifically on machine learning projects. So how do we build that trust? Well, the first thing that you would need is proper documentation, a paper trail that shows people how you started your project, what you ended up doing, what the scientific process was that you took, and where you ended up. How did you get those metrics that you're touting? The second one is reproducibility. So we know that maybe you could get really great results from an experiment, but could you get them again and again? Validation is extremely important, but honestly often overlooked and can be very difficult if you don't have the proper tools in place and organization for your project from day one. And the last one is transparency. So what was the data that you used and what was the journey that you took to get to your final model? And how are you going to further iterate and improve on it? We all know that that first version isn't going to be perfect. So what are you going to do next? So now that we know how to build trust, I wanted to focus on particularly ML products and how that makes things slightly more complicated. Within machine learning, you have three parts. You have your actual code that's running your training pipeline and evaluating. You have your input data, which is being fed into the model to train it. And then you also have your metrics, which is relaying the performance of that model on new data. So it becomes kind of tricky to figure out how to organize all these things to get the proper documentation in the end. We're going to be focusing on a tool called MLFlow that helps with automating metric tracking. MLFlow is an open source package with a Python API that allows you to kind of quickly gather metrics and put together documentation based on your experiment from day one all the way until production. And it automatically tracks relevant metadata that we'll learn about later on, and has a built-in database that you can use to store all of this data. And my favorite part is it comes with a UI which you can use to share with the experiment results with your team. Today, we're going to be talking about not just the basics of MLFlow or how to import it and install it, but actually the hidden gems that my team discovered while working on a project that we're going to call Project Fly. My team is a team of machine learning engineers here in Austin, and we work on a lot of different complex AI products. And this one was particularly interesting. It had us go through a bunch of images, and we had to somehow detect from radar data what was a foreign object or not. And the data itself wasn't necessarily easy. So we used MLFlow because we'd been using it on a few other projects, and it was going pretty well. We were going through the exploratory phase and just kind of making sure that we were logging all of our metrics using MLFlow's custom logging, which we had used on prior projects. For those of you who haven't used MLFlow, basically you can just write in your Python code a one-liner for each parameter that you want to log, or you can kind of codify it a little bit. But if you want to log something, you have to tell MLFlow how to log it and what to call the actual parameter or metric in your system. We had a ton of developers on this project, and we noticed that using MLFlow's custom logging was actually difficult as time went on because everyone was calling things differently, and there was really inconsistent logging. So the logging became kind of chaotic, and we really wanted to find a way to better leverage MLFlow so that way we could have consistency throughout our logging and we didn't have to use as many lines to actually do the logging that we kind of wanted MLFlow to do. And so that's when we're going to talk about hidden gem number 1. This is when we discovered that the MLFlow actually has an auto-logging feature which you can use in your Python code. And all you have to do is add this one script when you start your MLFlow experiment, and it will start logging all of your parameters and your metrics for that experiment. So this definitely made things a lot easier. We had a lot less lines of code related to logging, which involved a lot less cleanup in the end, and we had more consistent and thorough logging when it came to our experiment runs. This way, it didn't matter what branch somebody was on or what they had called a particular parameter. Everyone knew what was being referred to, and we had more automation around the logging. So everything was going pretty well, and we had gone through the experimentation that we wanted to explore the data, and we were now building our training pipeline. So we were doing some fine-tuning of the hyperparameters, and we wanted to make sure that we had a really good model, even though the problem itself was pretty complex. We were doing a lot of exploring, which is pretty difficult, but eventually one of our developers came across a really good model performance, and we were super, super stoked. It took a long time to get there, and we were excited to try to validate these results, which we were hoping would be a lot easier than it turned out to be. While we did have the MLFlow data and metrics, it kind of felt like searching for a needle in a haystack when it came to the training pipeline code that was used to actually generate those metrics. What we really wanted was a way for MLFlow, which tracked our metrics, to also align our code that was used to generate those metrics. So that way, whenever somebody wanted to validate a particular experiment's results, they knew exactly where to look for the exact version of code. So that way they could try to reproduce those results and those metrics. And that's when we searched through MLFlow's documentation and searched deep into the corners to find hidden gem number 2, which is MLFlow's system tags. So MLFlow, as we talked about a little earlier, saves metadata in the background that it kind of puts aside and allows you to use, but it doesn't necessarily log it automatically. And one piece of metadata that we found particularly relevant for our use case is the git commit hash. So using this key, you can tell MLFlow in your Python code to set this tag and use this key, and it'll store the value of the commit hash that is related to the experiment run that you just did to generate the metrics. So that way, when it comes time to validation, all you need to do is hand your teammates the run ID or the run name, and they can go and pull down that commit and rerun your code. So this is kind of how it looks in the UI. You can see that now there's a new column that's called tags, and it has this area that's called git commit hash. And a score, I know. This felt like a pretty big win because we wasted a lot less time searching through our code. It ended up also helping us spend more time doing validation because we didn't have to spend days and days trying to piece together the training pipeline. And we had better alignment with our code and our metrics. So this was all super exciting, and we were really pumped to finally have a model that was really strong in performance and that kind of beat out all of the other models that we had planned for. And we were ready for deployment, which was really exciting. All we had to do was just clean up some things for our documentation, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize that you have thousands and thousands of MLFlow runs and a lot of data to sort through to figure out exactly how to piece together the final big picture that you want to display to the client. It ended up being pretty hard to package up all this data, and we found ourselves really wishing that we had a better way to pick out important milestones within our machine learning project. So we kind of searched around, and that's when we came across hidden gem number 3. So hidden gem number 3 is MLFlow's model registry. And basically, MLFlow's model registry is a way for you to kind of keep track of all of your different models that you generate over an experiment and figure out exactly which model runs were important enough to version into an actual model name and continue keeping the history of. I think of it kind of like a tag for a git commit hash, where when you have an important commit, you can tag it and say, like, this commit is really important. If you're looking at my repo and you want to see kind of the most important changes we've made, look at this tag. And later on, if you want, you can even use the tag to version the code. So in that way, we started using the model registry to flag the most important MLFlow runs and figure out which ones were relevant to the end product that we were trying to display to the customer. And so we ended up having around 4 versions for Project Llama that we documented this way using the MLFlow's model registry. And basically, you can see you can also transition the lifecycle stage using their registry. Basically, all we needed to do was provide that one command in our Python script and provide it with the actual run ID that is associated with the model that we wanted to create and give that model a name. Every single time we had an important enough change where we wanted to version up that model, we would just need to give a new run ID with the same model name, and MLFlow automatically bumped up the version, as you can see here. If you want, you can also transition your model between different stages using that same command. So we found that pretty helpful, and we felt safer about our documentation and better about reporting different milestones that we had achieved. It definitely also helped searchability when it came to communicating within our team the most important MLFlow runs for later modifications and improvements. So with these hidden gems, we were able to save a ton of precious development time because we weren't spending time searching through our code, looking through our commit hashes, or trying to piece together a training pipeline. And we weren't trying to reconcile all the different logging. We also built confidence in our metrics because we had a much more robust validation loop. We knew exactly the code that was used to generate those metrics, and it was no longer a mystery how we could reproduce those metrics because of the git commit hash logging. And we overall instilled trust in our process. So we were able to kind of demonstrate to the client all of the different tactics that we used to get to the final result, and it didn't feel like a black box to them. And that way, we earned ourselves a lifelong client, and despite the painful journey, lifelong lessons with MLFlow. So Project Llama was very clearly a roller coaster where we learned a lot, but we also learned a few more things that I wanted to share with you all that are more helpful tips rather than hidden gems within MLFlow. The first one involves another story within Project Llama. So Project Llama was, again, a ton of developers with lots of different ranges of experience, and during midway through the project, we accidentally deleted our MLFlow database, which is definitely a step back in terms of documentation and timelines. We had to spend another week trying to reproduce our results, and it took us time to retrace our steps and figure out where we wanted to go next when it came to experimentation and model development. So for that reason, I highly recommend that you create a backup of your MLFlow database from day one, because even though you don't think you'll need it, you never know when your database will accidentally be deleted. I suggest, either using creating a backup of your RDS instance or however you have it connected, or just logging the actual MLFlow files to S3 and ensuring that it is synced with your repo. Anything will help besides not having a backup at all. And the second one is to commit frequently. In software development, this is a mantra that we all know about, but I feel like when it comes to machine learning and data science, it can be hard to remember due to the highly experimental nature of the process. Even though your training pipeline code may seem totally far away from the final product when you start experimentation, I recommend that you take the time to make sure that you're committing every single time you have a change important enough to kick off a whole new run of experiments. I think that has helped our team, because that means that every single time we've committed right before kicking off a batch of experiments, we are sure that the commit hash contains all of the code that would be required to then validate your model performance. So our team has actually instilled a bash script that we have to warn us when there is a dirty working tree before kicking off a training pipeline. Yay! That's how I feel. And the third one is to version your data. So this one is more related to the input data, but as we talked about earlier, there are three parts of a machine learning project. There is your code, your metrics, and your data. MLFlow does a great job at tracking your metrics, and it also has a way for you to align your metrics with your code. But as far as I know, it doesn't have any data versioning yet. So I would recommend implementing some kind of tool like data version control or a cookie cutter data science or some kind of nomenclature within your team that helps you understand the different phases of your data. This will help with validation as well. So that is kind of it for the 3 hidden gems of MLFlow. I wanted to point out a few important links. If you want to try out these hidden gems, the first link contains a link to a GitHub repo that contains the code to a containerized application demonstrating these capabilities in working code. So definitely feel free to test that out so you don't have to go and discover how to implement some of these things, because they can be kind of tricky looking through the documentation alone. The second one is a link to my contact. So it has my LinkedIn and my social. Feel free to add that. And the third one is my company's name and our website. I work with KUNGFU.AI, which is a boutique AI consulting firm. And if you want to work with a team that likes to build trust and within their metrics and their process, then talk to me about it after this.